Manager said, take the 30% cut or leave. Then I made one phone call and got a 100% raise. 6 years. 6 years of my life poured into Northbridge Tech like water into sand, disappearing without a trace. 6 years of building marketing campaigns from nothing but ideas scribbled on napkins during late-night brainstorming sessions. 6 years of pulling all-nighters that left me with burning eyes and a perpetual coffee addiction, just to meet impossible deadlines that somehow became possible because I made them so. 6 years of winning client renewals that kept this company's lights on. 6 years of training bright-eyed interns who walked through our doors knowing nothing about digital marketing, watching them grow into confident team leads under my guidance. 6 years of watching those same people get promoted while I was told to be patient and wait for my turn. But apparently, none of that mattered on the Tuesday morning when Grant Morrison called me into his glass-walled fishbowl of an office. The November rain streaked down the floor-to-ceiling windows behind his desk, casting gray shadows across the room. Grant sat there in his usual uniform, navy blazer that had seen better days, white shirt with a small stain near the collar that he probably didn't even notice. His thinning hair was combed over in a way that fooled no one, and his pale fingers drummed against his mahogany desk with the rhythm of someone who'd already made up their mind. "Leah, have a seat," he said without looking up from his computer screen. I settled into the chair across from him, the same chair where I'd sat countless times before, where I'd pitched the Meridian campaign that brought in $2 million in revenue, where I'd presented the social media strategy that increased our client engagement by 300%, where I'd begged for the promotion that never came. The office felt different today. Colder. More final. "We need to talk about your position here," Grant said, finally closing his laptop and giving me his attention. His brown eyes held no warmth, no recognition of our working relationship. Just business. "Okay," I said, straightening in my chair. "What about it?" He leaned back, fingers steepled like he was delivering a sermon. "Look, Leah, you know how much we value your contributions here. You've been a solid team player, really solid. Solid team player. The kiss of death in corporate speak. But we're facing some tough decisions. Budget constraints, you know? Economic uncertainty. We need to trim some overhead, make some hard choices." My stomach dropped, but I kept my expression neutral. "What kind of hard choices?" Grant's mouth twitched into what might have been a smile if it had contained any actual humanity. "We need to trim overhead. Take the 30% cut or leave. That's the choice." The words hit me like a physical blow. I blinked, certain I'd misheard him. "I'm sorry, what?" "Salary reduction. 30%. It's not personal. It's just business." I stared at him, this man who'd taken credit for my work for 3 years running, who'd presented my strategies to the board and basked in their praise while I watched from the sidelines, who'd promised me opportunities that never materialized while his golf buddies got hired into positions they weren't qualified for. But why me? The question came out smaller than I intended, and I hated myself for it. Hated that I sounded vulnerable when I needed to sound strong. Grant shrugged, and that casual gesture broke something inside me. A shrug. Like my 6 years of dedication, my late nights, my sacrificed weekends, my blood, sweat, and tears meant so little they could be dismissed with a shoulder movement. "You're not essential," he said, as if he was commenting on the weather. Those 3 words echoed in my head like gunshots. Not essential. Not essential. After everything I'd done, everything I'd given, everything I'd sacrificed for this company, I wasn't essential. I didn't argue. What was the point? I didn't scream, though every cell in my body wanted to. I didn't cry, though I felt the tears burning behind my eyes like acid. I didn't beg, though part of me wanted to remind him of every campaign, every client, every late night that had made his job easier. Instead, I just stared at him. Really stared. At this man who believed he had power over me. This man who thought he could reduce my worth to a number on a spreadsheet, who thought he could erase 6 years of my life with a casual ultimatum. I saw him clearly for the first time, not as my manager, not as someone whose approval I'd been seeking, but as exactly what he was, A mediocre man who'd been handed opportunities I'd had to fight for, who'd been given credit for work I'd done, who'd been promoted based on connections I'd never had. "I see," I said quietly. Then I stood up, smoothed down my black blazer, and walked out of his office without another word. But I didn't go home. I didn't go to my desk to pack my things. I didn't go to the break room to tell my coworkers what had happened. Instead, I walked straight to the elevator, pulled out my phone, and made one phone call. One call that was about to change everything. The parking garage was empty except for my Honda Civic sitting under the fluorescent lights like a faithful friend waiting to take me home. But I wasn't ready to go home yet. I wasn't ready to sit in my apartment and stew over what had just happened, wasn't ready to call my best friend Maya and vent about Grant's audacity, wasn't ready to update my LinkedIn profile and start the soul-crushing job hunt. Instead, I leaned against the concrete wall next to the elevator and stared at my phone screen. At a contact I'd deliberately kept separate from my work life for 6 long years. Dad. Not Preston Dalton, angel investor. Not Preston Dalton, venture capitalist. Not Preston Dalton, the man whose money built half the startups in the city. Just Dad. You see, here's what Grant Morrison and everyone else at Northbridge Tech never knew about me. My full name isn't just Leah Monroe. It's Leah Monroe Dalton. But when I filled out my employment paperwork 6 years ago, when I shook hands with the hiring manager and accepted my first real job out of college, I made a deliberate choice. I used my mother's maiden name, Monroe. Clean, professional, unassuming. A name that wouldn't open doors I hadn't earned. Because Preston Dalton, my father, wasn't just some successful businessman. He was the primary angel investor who'd funded Northbridge Tech when it was nothing more than 3 guys with laptops working out of a WeWork space. Before they had office furniture, before they had clients, before they had the marble floors Grant loved so much, my father believed in their vision enough to write them their first $1 million check. I'd grown up watching him evaluate startups, watching him turn ideas into empires, watching him build a fortune by seeing potential where others saw risk. And I'd also grown up watching people treat me differently the moment they learned whose daughter I was. The fake friendships, the people who suddenly wanted to hang out once they knew about the family money, the assumptions that everything I achieved was handed to me on a silver platter. So when I graduated from Northwestern with my marketing degree, when it was time to start my career, I made a promise to myself. I would earn my place in this world. I would prove that I could succeed on my own merit, with my own skills, using my own mind and my own work ethic. I didn't want special treatment. I didn't want doors opened because of my last name. I wanted to know that everything I achieved was mine. For 6 years, I'd kept that promise. For 6 years, I'd been Leah Monroe, hardworking, dedicated, overlooked Leah Monroe. I'd shown up early and stayed late. I'd taken on projects nobody else wanted. I'd made this company money, saved them clients, trained their people, and asked for nothing more than basic respect and fair compensation in return. And what did I get? A 30% pay cut and 3 words that felt like a slap across the face. You're not essential. My fingers hovered over my father's contact information. I could picture him right now, probably in his downtown office 60 floors above the city, probably reviewing pitch decks from the latest batch of entrepreneurs who thought they had the next big idea. He'd be wearing one of his perfectly tailored suits, the ones that cost more than most people's monthly rent, his silver hair impeccably styled, his dark eyes sharp with the intelligence that had built his empire from nothing. Preston Dalton had grown up poor in Southside Chicago, the son of a factory worker and a house cleaner. He'd earned scholarships, worked 3 jobs through college, and built his first company before he turned 30. He understood struggle. He understood what it meant to be underestimated, to have to fight for every opportunity, to prove yourself over and over again just to get a seat at the table. But he'd also taught me something else. Sometimes, when people push you too far, when they disrespect you despite everything you've given them, it's time to remind them exactly who they're dealing with. I pressed call. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. Leah, baby girl. What's wrong? Even after all these years, he could still read me like a book. How did you know something was wrong? Because you never call me during work hours unless it's important.
Talk to me. So I did.
I told him everything. About Grant's ultimatum, about being called non-essential, about 6 years of being passed over and undervalued, about the golf buddies getting hired while I got salary cuts, about every slight, every dismissal, every moment I'd swallowed my pride because I was trying to prove I could make it on my own. When I finished, the line was quiet for a long moment. Then my father's voice came through, low and controlled in a way that meant he was furious. "Don't worry, baby. I'll handle it. But I want you at the board meeting next week." And Leah? "Yeah, Dad. Bring your offer." The Northbridge Tech boardroom had always intimidated me. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, a mahogany table that could seat 20 people, leather chairs that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I'd been in this room exactly 3 times in 6 years, always as the person taking notes in the corner, always invisible, always forgettable. But today was different. Today, I walked through those imposing double doors wearing my best black blazer, the one I'd bought for job interviews but never had the courage to wear to work. Today, my natural hair was styled in a sleek bun that made me look older, more serious, more like someone who belonged in rooms like this. Today, I carried a leather portfolio that contained 6 years' worth of receipts, data, and proof that I was anything but non-essential. The quarterly board meeting was already in session when I entered. Grant was in the middle of his presentation, standing at the head of the table with a PowerPoint slide showing third-quarter revenue. He was wearing his best suit, the charcoal gray one he reserved for important occasions, and his voice carried that confident tone he used when he was taking credit for other people's work. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me. "Leah?" His voice cracked slightly. "What are you doing here?" Every head in the room turned toward me. I recognized most of the faces: investors, board members, executives I'd seen in company newsletters, but never met personally. At the far end of the table sat CEO Marcus Webb, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair. He gave me a subtle nod, and I realized he already knew why I was here. But the person I was really looking for sat 3 seats to his left. Preston Dalton looked exactly as I'd imagined, impeccably dressed in a navy suit that probably cost more than Grant's monthly salary, his silver hair perfectly styled, his dark skin showing no signs of the stress I knew he must be feeling. When our eyes met, he gave me the slightest smile, the kind that said, "I'm proud of you, baby girl." "Good afternoon, everyone," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I apologize for the interruption, but I have something important to share with the board." Grant's face had gone from confused to panicked. "This is highly irregular. Board meetings are closed sessions." "Actually, Grant," Marcus Webb interrupted, "Ms. Monroe Dalton is here at my invitation." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on that expensive carpet. Grant's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water as the implications of my full name began to sink in. "Monroe Dalton?" whispered Janet Kim, the CFO, her eyes darting between me and my father. Preston Dalton stood up slowly, commanding the room's attention the way he'd been doing for 30 years. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to formally introduce my daughter, Leah Monroe Dalton, who has been working at this company for the past 6 years under her mother's maiden name. She's also," he paused for effect, "a shareholder in Northbridge Tech." The gasps were audible. Grant looked like he might faint. I stepped forward, placing my portfolio on the table. "Thank you, Dad. And thank you, Mr. Webb, for allowing me to address the board today." For the next 20 minutes, I laid out everything. Calmly, methodically, without emotion, I presented a comprehensive analysis of my contributions to Northbridge Tech. The Meridian account that brought in $2 million. The social media strategy that tripled engagement. The client retention program that saved 4 major accounts from jumping ship. The mentorship program I developed that reduced intern turnover by 60%. I had spreadsheets showing revenue I'd generated. Emails from satisfied clients praising my work. Performance reviews that contradicted Grant's claims about my value to the company. I had data, facts, numbers, everything Grant claimed to care about when he decided I wasn't essential. "Over the past 6 years," I said, clicking to my final slide, "I have directly generated over $12 million in revenue for this company. I have saved us approximately $3 million in client retention costs. I have trained and developed 15 employees who are now in leadership positions. The room was captivated. Even Grant had stopped trying to interrupt. Yesterday, my direct supervisor informed me that I was non-essential and offered me a choice: accept a 30% salary reduction or leave the company. I looked directly at Grant, who had turned an interesting shade of green. Today, I'm here to make a counteroffer. I clicked to my final slide. I'm requesting a 100% salary adjustment, doubling my current compensation, retroactive for the past 2 years. This would bring my salary in line with industry standards for someone with my experience and track record. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Furthermore, I continued, if this adjustment cannot be approved, I'll be taking my talents, my client relationships, and my institutional knowledge elsewhere. And based on the data I've presented, I think we all know what that would mean for Northbridge's bottom line. I closed my laptop and looked around the room. The clients trust me. They know my work. They know my value. The question is, do you? The silence in the boardroom stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic 60 floors below, even the whisper of expensive fabric as board members shifted in their seats. Grant stood frozen at the front of the room, his PowerPoint presentation forgotten, his face cycling through colors like a broken traffic light. Then Janet Kim, the CFO, cleared her throat. Actually, she said slowly, reaching for a manila folder that had been sitting closed beside her laptop, I think this is an excellent time to address some concerns that have come to my attention. My father leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He'd been in enough boardrooms to recognize the moment when someone was about to get destroyed by their own actions. Grant's eyes darted to the folder in Janet's hands. What concerns? Well, Grant, since we're talking about performance and value. Janet opened the folder and pulled out a thick stack of papers. I've been conducting a routine audit of departmental expenses and personnel decisions. Some interesting patterns have emerged. The room's attention shifted from me to Janet, but I could see Grant's hands beginning to shake. Interesting patterns. In corporate speak, that was the equivalent of a death sentence. For instance, Janet continued, flipping through the papers, in the past 3 years, you've hired 5 new employees. All male. All from your alma mater. All with starting salaries that exceed what employees with similar experience typically receive. She looked up at Grant over her reading glasses. Care to explain why Jake Henderson was hired as a senior analytics coordinator at a salary of $95,000, despite having no analytics experience? Jake brings unique value to our team dynamic, Grant stammered, repeating the same words he'd used with me. Unique value, Janet repeated flatly. Is that what we're calling it when someone spends company time managing their fantasy football league? A few snickers rippled around the table. Grant's face went from red to pale in seconds. Furthermore, Janet continued, clearly enjoying herself now, I've noticed a disturbing pattern in your performance reviews. Over the past 3 years, you've consistently rated female employees lower than their male counterparts, despite objective metrics showing superior performance. She pulled out another sheet. Leah Monroe, for example, has the highest client satisfaction scores in the company. She's brought in more revenue than any other marketing associate. Yet her last 3 performance reviews rated her as meets expectations, while Jake Henderson, who has brought in 0 new clients, was rated as exceeds expectations. Grant opened his mouth to speak, but Janet wasn't finished. And then there's the matter of the Meridian account. According to these email records, Leah was the primary contact who secured that client. She developed the entire campaign strategy, managed the relationship, and delivered results that exceeded targets by 40%. Yet in your quarterly report to this board, you took full credit for that success.
The room was dead silent now.
Even the air conditioning seemed to have stopped humming. Marcus Webb, the CEO, leaned forward. Grant, these are serious allegations. They're not allegations, Janet corrected. They're facts. Documented facts. I have emails, expense reports, performance data, and client feedback that paint a very clear picture of systematic discrimination and mismanagement. My father finally spoke, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made him one of the most respected investors in the city. This is exactly the kind of toxic leadership that destroys companies from the inside out. Grant's empire was crumbling in real time. You could see it in his eyes. The realization that he'd been caught, that his carefully constructed facade was falling apart. He'd thought he was untouchable, thought his connections and his swagger would protect him. He'd never imagined that someone would actually be keeping track of his failures. I can explain, he started, but Marcus Webb held up a hand to stop him. Grant, I think you've said enough. In fact, I think you've said more than enough over the past several years. Marcus looked around the table, making eye contact with each board member. All in favor of accepting Ms. Monroe Dalton's compensation adjustment. Every hand went up. Every single one. And all in favor of promoting her to Director of Strategic Development. Again, unanimous approval. Marcus turned back to Grant, his expression cold as winter. Grant Morrison, effective immediately, you are being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation into your management practices. HR will be in touch regarding the next steps. Grant's mouth opened and closed like he was trying to speak, but no words came out. His face had gone completely white now, the color of someone who just realized they'd bet everything on a losing hand. Security will escort you out, Marcus added. Please clean out your office by end of business today. Grant looked around the room desperately, searching for an ally, for someone who might defend him. But there was no one. His golf buddies weren't here to save him. His fraternity connections couldn't help him now. Without another word, he gathered his papers and walked toward the door, his shoulders slumped in defeat. No one stopped him. No one said goodbye. No one even looked at him as he left. For the first time in years, I could finally breathe. Monday morning arrived like a gift I'd been waiting years to unwrap. I walked through the lobby of Northbridge Tech with my head held higher than it had been in months, my black heels clicking against the marble floors with a rhythm that sounded like victory. The security guard, Miguel, smiled and waved like he always did, but today there was something different in his expression. Respect, maybe. Or perhaps just recognition that the woman walking past his desk was no longer the same person who'd left here in defeat just a week ago. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt different too. Instead of the familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach, the one that had lived there for 6 years, feeding on performance reviews and promotion promises that never materialized, I felt something I hadn't experienced in this building since my very first day, genuine excitement about what lay ahead. When the doors opened, I was greeted by a sight that made me pause. There, next to the elevators, was a new directory board. And there, in crisp black letters on white plastic, was my name. L. Monroe Dalton, Director of Strategic Development.
Director.
Not associate, not coordinator, not team player.
Director.
The walk to my new office, Grant's former office, felt surreal. The same glass walls that had once felt like a fishbowl designed to showcase my humiliation now felt like a command center where real decisions would be made. The mahogany desk where Grant had delivered his ultimatum now belonged to me. The leather chair where he'd leaned back with casual cruelty was now mine to occupy. But the real victory wasn't the office or the title. It was the envelope sitting in the center of the desk, bearing the Northbridge Tech logo and my full name written in elegant script. Inside was my new employment contract. The salary figure made me blink twice to make sure I wasn't seeing things. Not only had the board approved my 100% salary increase, but they'd also included a signing bonus, stock options, and a retroactive payment for the past 2 years that would arrive in my bank account by Friday. I was still staring at the numbers when there was a soft knock on my door. "Come in," I called, and Sarah Chen from HR entered, carrying a tablet and wearing the kind of smile that suggested good news. "Good morning, Director Monroe Dalton," she said, and I loved how natural that sounded coming from her. "I wanted to personally deliver your new access credentials and discuss the timeline for your transition." As Sarah walked me through my new responsibilities, my mind wandered to all the changes I wanted to implement. the mentorship program that Grant had repeatedly shot down, the client satisfaction initiative that could prevent the kind of retention issues that had cost us millions, the diversity and inclusion training that this company desperately needed. "There's one more thing," Sarah said, interrupting my thoughts. "The board has specifically requested that you lead a comprehensive review of our compensation and promotion practices. They want to ensure that what happened to you doesn't happen to anyone else." The irony wasn't lost on me. The same company that had tried to cut my salary by 30% was now asking me to fix the broken system that had enabled that injustice. "I'd be honored," I said, and I meant it. Over the next few hours, my calendar filled with meetings. Clients wanted to schedule check-ins. Team members requested one-on-ones. Other department heads reached out to introduce themselves and discuss potential collaborations. But it was the smaller interactions that really showed me how much had changed. People looked at me differently now. Not with the mixture of pity and dismissal I'd grown accustomed to, but with something that took me a while to recognize: respect. When I walked down the hallway, conversations didn't stop. They shifted to include me. When I spoke in meetings, people listened. Really listened. Maya from accounting stopped by my office around lunchtime, her eyes wide with amazement. "Girl, the whole building is buzzing," she said, settling into one of my new chairs. "People are calling it the greatest comeback in corporate history." "It's not a comeback," I corrected her. "It's a recognition. I never went anywhere." But Maya was right about the buzzing. By Wednesday, the story had spread beyond our building. LinkedIn messages started pouring in from people I hadn't heard from in years. Former colleagues reached out to congratulate me. Recruiters who'd never given me a second glance suddenly found my profile fascinating. The most satisfying moment came on Thursday when Jake Henderson, Grant's fraternity buddy and fantasy football enthusiast, knocked on my door, looking nervous. "Hey, Director Monroe Dalton," he stammered. "I just wanted to say congratulations on the promotion." I looked at him. This man who'd been hired at a higher salary than mine despite having no relevant experience, and felt something I hadn't expected: sympathy. "Thank you, Jake," I said. "I'm looking forward to working together more effectively." He shifted uncomfortably. "I also wanted to apologize if there were times when I know Grant could be discriminatory, unfair, toxic." I supplied when he couldn't find the words. He nodded miserably. "Jake, you benefited from an unfair system, but you didn't create it. What matters now is what you do moving forward. Are you willing to be part of making this company better?" The relief on his face was palpable. "Yes, absolutely." After he left, I sat back in my chair and smiled. This was what real leadership looked like. Not the petty power games and favoritism that Grant had practiced, but the kind of leadership that lifted people up instead of tearing them down. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Proud of you, baby girl. You're exactly where you belong." He was right. I was exactly where I belonged. Not because of my last name or my father's money, but because I'd earned it. 6 years of work, dedication, and excellence had finally been recognized for what it was. And this was just the beginning. 3 weeks later, I stood in the lobby of Northbridge Tech watching 2 security guards carry out a cardboard box containing the last remnants of Grant Morrison's office. His golf trophies, his fraternity photo, his world's best boss mug that someone had given him as a joke, all of it disappearing through the revolving doors like a bad dream finally ending. The investigation had moved swiftly. Janet Kim's documentation was thorough, devastating, and undeniable. Grant's pattern of discrimination wasn't just limited to salary disparities. It extended to performance reviews, promotion recommendations, project assignments, and even something as basic as meeting invitations. The legal department had quietly settled with 3 former female employees who'd been pushed out under his management. The company's insurance would cover the settlements, but Grant's reputation was finished. Word traveled fast in our industry. Within a week of his departure, I'd heard through various channels that Grant was struggling to find new employment. Turns out, when your primary reference is a company that fired you for discrimination, and your former subordinate is now making waves as a rising star in strategic development, doors don't open as easily as they once did. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall. If anything, I felt relief that his toxic influence was no longer poisoning the workplace for others who might find themselves in the position I'd been in just a month ago. The real change wasn't just Grant's absence, it was what we'd built in the space he'd left behind. The mentorship program I'd proposed years ago was now in full swing, pairing junior employees with senior staff across all departments. The client satisfaction scores had improved by 20% since I'd implemented new communication protocols. Most importantly, the comprehensive compensation audit I'd led had resulted in salary adjustments for 11 employees, mostly women and people of color who'd been systematically undervalued for years. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural. People spoke differently in meetings now. Ideas were evaluated on merit rather than who proposed them. The boys' club atmosphere that had permeated the office was gradually being replaced by something more inclusive, more collaborative, more professional. Standing in my office that Friday afternoon, I looked at the nameplate that had arrived that morning. Instead of the temporary placard that had announced my new position, this was permanent. Engraved brass mounted on rich wood, reading Director of Strategic Development, L. Monroe Dalton. Monroe Dalton. Both names. Both parts of who I was. For 6 years, I'd hidden half of my identity, believing that I needed to prove myself without the advantage or burden of my father's reputation. And I had proven myself. Every campaign I'd built, every client I'd retained, every late night I'd worked, all of that was mine. My talent, my dedication, my results. But I was done hiding. The decision to include Dalton on my nameplate wasn't about claiming privilege or trading on my father's success. It was about embracing the fullness of who I was, a woman who'd earned her place through merit and happened to come from a family that understood the value of hard work and excellence. My assistant knocked and entered, carrying a stack of resumes. "These are the candidates for the new associate marketing position," she said, placing them on my desk. "HR has completed the initial screening." I flipped through the applications, noting the diversity of backgrounds, schools, and experiences represented. This was what I'd wanted to see, opportunity extended broadly, not just to people who looked like Grant or went to his alma mater. One resume caught my attention. Maria Santos, recent graduate from a state school I'd never heard of, but with internship experience that showed real promise and a portfolio that demonstrated creativity and strategic thinking. Under Grant's system, her application probably would have been discarded for not fitting the culture. Under mine, she was getting an interview. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Drinks tonight to celebrate your 1-month anniversary as director?" I smiled and texted back. "Absolutely. But we're going somewhere nicer than our usual spot. I'm buying." As I was gathering my things to leave, my father called. "How's my favorite director doing?" he asked, and I could hear the pride in his voice. "Good, Dad. Really good. Thank you for believing in me." Baby girl, I didn't do anything except make a phone call. Everything else, the presentation, the data, the way you handled that room, that was all you. That was 6 years of excellence, finally getting the recognition it deserved. He was right. The phone call had opened the door, but I'd walked through it on my own strength. "I've been thinking," I said, looking out my office window at the city skyline, "about starting a foundation. Something focused on mentoring young women and people of color in business, helping them navigate corporate environments, giving them the tools and confidence they need to advocate for themselves." "That's a beautiful idea," he said. "Count me in as your first investor." After we hung up, I sat in my office for a few more minutes, watching the sun set over the city. Tomorrow was Saturday, but I'd probably come in anyway, not because I had to, but because I loved what I was building here. The woman who'd walked out of Grant's office 3 weeks ago with nothing but wounded pride and quiet dignity had been transformed. Not by money or titles or corner offices, but by the simple recognition of her worth. I still signed most of my emails Leah Monroe out of habit. But now, when it mattered on contracts, on presentations, on the nameplate that would greet visitors to my office, I was Leah Monroe Dalton. Because I wasn't hiding anymore. I was exactly who I'd always been. Someone who earned her place, someone who lifted others up, someone who believed that excellence should be rewarded regardless of where it comes from. I didn't take the 30% cut. I made one phone call. And that call didn't just double my salary. It reset the balance of power in the company I'd helped build and reminded everyone that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one you've underestimated.